LiberalViewer presents.
So, welcome to the January 31st edition of LiberalViewer Monday Media Mix-Up. Thanks for joining me. Today I'll be using the dozen best, most newsworthy clips I picked out from the Sunday morning news analysis shows from the big five corporate outlets of ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, and Fox News, the so-called corporate media here in the United States, for what should be a really informative, educational, fair use, media criticism, and political commentary show for you all today. My main topic, as you can see in the video title, is Black Woman on the Supreme Court, because Stephen Breyer retired from the Supreme Court this last week, and Joe Biden has promised to appoint a black woman to the Supreme Court, and that seems to be something that's going to be in the news a lot for the next several months. And if you look at the thumbnail for my video, you'll see the three top contenders. There's Ketanji Brown Jackson, there's Leandra Kruger, and there is J. Michelle Childs. And by the time we get finished with this video, I'm going to show you a couple clips that make it look like Michelle Childs is the leading candidate, and then one clip that maybe Ketanji Brown Jackson's the leading candidate. But before I get to all that, I do want to start with my political comedy, and I haven't used a clip from Bill Maher for a while, especially not one as actual comedy, more as a basis for critique. And the reason is because Bill Maher has been drifting more and more away from liberalism and from progressive politics for a long time, and in his new rule on Friday, he claimed, like, I don't know, a lot of people who move to the right as they get older, you know, the liberals didn't, he hasn't gotten less liberals, the liberals have just gone crazy or have left him, and I think that's kind of a comical perspective, as I will explain to you a little more after. This is a much longer new rule. You can watch the whole thing at a link I put down in the video description. But here's the part I want to criticize and talk to you about a little more after we watch together over here. Oh, and it talks about how he's, for the context, he's talking about how he's gone from being a target of one Bush administration press secretary, and he shows a clip of Ari Fleischer saying he should watch his words right after 9/11. He got fired from ABC for, saying that it wasn't cowardly to do a suicide bombing, basically. And then Dana Perino, now who was George W. Bush's press secretary, is now on Fox News saying maybe he should run for president as a Democrat. And that is sort of the intro to the clip I will talk about with you a little more after we watch together over here.
It'll be interesting to see if Bill Maher is recruited to run for the presidency.
Now, some people think this means I've changed. I assure you, I have not. I am still the same unmarried, childless, pot-smoking libertine I always was. I have many flaws, but you can't accuse me of maturing. Let's get this straight. It's not me who's changed. It's the left, who is now made up of a small contingent who've gone mental and a large contingent who refuse to call them out for it. But I will. That's why I'm a hero at Fox these days. Which shows just how much liberals have their head up their ass, because if they really thought about it, they would have made me a hero on their media. But
I don't know. You think that Bill Maher really thinks he should be a hero for liberal media for not understanding a lot of the important issues that, he talks about how he's an unmarried, childless, pot-smoking libertine, but that's the thing. A lot of his leftism, his progressivism is kind of self-centered on the things that benefit him. And when he's talking about free speech, he's actually talking about like free speech for rich white men, and he's like a champion of free speech because he got fired from his show at ABC. Now, I actually have been a fan of Bill Maher for a really long time. In fact, I saw his show Politically Incorrect in June of 2000. June of 2001, before 9/11 and before he got fired. He got fired later that year. I was down in LA. I've seen Bill Maher perform live, I don't know, maybe a dozen times, his stand-up comedy act, and if he thinks that he hasn't changed, it's the left that's gone crazy, and that Fox News is now recognizing him for his liberal values. That's my political comedy. But I actually want to talk more about free speech and Bill Maher, and if you go down to the link in the video description to the real-time channel on YouTube that I put under the sources, you'll see that Bill Maher also talked to the former executive director of the ACLU, Ira Glasser, and they criticized the current ACLU's free speech policies. And I've actually decided I'm going to do a live stream about that because it's something I know a lot about. I've worked with the ACLU for many years, even on free speech issues and on some of the post-Charlottesville changes. So I put the very first link down in the video description, goes to this Thursday live stream I'm planning, ACLU, free speech, and critical race theory. And I'll explain to you how critical race theory informs our understanding of free speech, how it's not just for rich white men. If you notice, if you go to that web page, you see that little bell where it says set reminder. Since this isn't my regular live stream time, click on that little bell and set a reminder for yourself. I really, this is something I don't normally do, and I'm sort of promoting it on my regular Monday live stream just to see if people are interested in that type of thing. So let me know in the comments if you're interested, and if you are interested, go and click on that little bell and get a reminder. So anyway, that is the introduction with the political comedy and the promotion for my Thursday live stream. And I'm now going to go to the news summaries, which I have from longest to shortest. And this week, the longest one is actually Fox News Sunday. They beat out, it's not Chuck Todd with the biggest, longest package. Well, actually, I think Chuck Todd still has the biggest, longest package, because the package is the pre-recorded video, and there's very little pre-recorded video in the Fox News Sunday news summary when they finally get to Ukraine. And there are 2 of the 5 news stations fell into the trap that is a huge bias for the cable news networks, and it doesn't have anything to do with political bias. It's geographic bias. If like something happens to New York or Washington D.C., it gets so much more coverage than if it happens somewhere else. And that's what happened with this big snowstorm over the weekend. This is like something local news should be covering. And Fox News, CBS News Face the Nation fell into the trap a little bit, but Fox News went like way overboard on their, if there's snow in winter, that's the news. Snow in winter. Not really news if you ask me, but anyway, so here is 2 different reporters, one from Boston, one from New York Central Park, talking to Dana Perino about, and as luck would have it, Dana Perino, who you saw in the Bill Maher clip there, is the host of Fox News Sunday this week. Since Chris Wallace left, they're doing rotating hosts. And so Dana Perino talks to a reporter in Boston, a reporter in Central Park, and then finally a reporter in Ukraine talking about the Russian threat to Ukraine, which is a more legitimate story, although also might be hyped up for reasons I will talk about with you a little more after we watch that news summary together over here.
And hello again from Fox News in Washington. We'll get to the tense situation in Ukraine in a moment. But first, let's begin with breaking weather news as a nor'easter dumped almost 2 feet of snow across parts of the mid-Atlantic and New England. Wind gusts of more than 70 miles per hour, knocking out power to more than 100,000 homes and businesses, with bitter cold in the forecast. The powerful storm also forcing airlines to cancel flights in and out of New York, Philadelphia, and Boston. We have team coverage. Alexis McAdams here on the ground in New York City. But let's begin with Mola Lenghi. She is live in Plymouth, Massachusetts. Hi, Molly.
Good morning, Dana. It is a beautiful but very frosty, cold day here in Plymouth. 9 degrees. Up in Boston, just 11 degrees. Pretty cold for a dig-out day, which is what today amounts to being. Boston also seeing the biggest single-day snow record, 23.6 inches. Now, throughout the course of this storm, some 100,000 people were without power. Very gusty storm, a lot of high winds. Utility crews came in from all over the country, from Michigan, from Florida, to get the lights back on. And at this hour, there are still more than 50,000 people without power, according to the Massachusetts Emergency Management map app that they have. When you talk about the course of this storm, a lot of coastal flooding, lots of problems to the south of the city of Boston, from Plymouth, lots of flooding in Situate and out on Nantucket. And at this hour, the flights are finally beginning to get off the ground. But Boston Logan Airport still seeing a lot of cancellations and delays. And just to the south of us in LaGuardia, 45% or so delays and cancellations. So today, a beautiful sunny day to get things up, back in the air and off of the ground and get the cleanup going. Likely the kids will be back in school on Monday. Dana?
I love how positive you are about it all, Molly. Truly a woman from New England. Thank you so much. Let's go now to Alexis McAdams. She is live in Central Park. Hi, Alexis.
Hi, Dana. Well, it's beautiful here in Central Park, a very picturesque scene. Lots of people out enjoying the winter elements here in Central Park, according to the North Weather Service. Take a look here. They had about 8 inches of snow here that fell, and it's that light, fluffy stuff. So that's what really caused a lot of the visibility issues. But back out here today, we'll give you a live look around Central Park. You can see there's really not too many issues out here right now. The light, fluffy mix, though, is creating picturesque views here. But Long Island was hit with about 2 feet of snow. While the storm moved out overnight, it left behind a large cleanup task, so it's not beautiful everywhere around New York. The roads are still pretty messy. The Department of Sanitation has crews on 12-hour shifts working to clear the snow and ice for the roads, preparing for Monday's commute. Today, less flight cancellations. Both are operating, LaGuardia and JFK, at about 50%, but still a lot more work needs to be done, Dana.
Fun to see everybody out and about. Thank you, Alexis. For extended coverage, download the Fox Weather app at foxweather.com. Now to the high-stakes diplomacy to stop a war in Eastern Europe. The U.S. and its allies confronting Russia over its buildup of troops along the border of Ukraine and fears Vladimir Putin could invade within weeks. And tomorrow, the U.S. will square off with Russia at a UN Security Council meeting in New York. In a moment, we'll speak live with Pentagon Press Secretary Jon Kirby. But first, let's turn to Alex Hoff. She's at the White House with the latest developments. Good morning, Alex.
Good morning, Dana. This U.S. Security Council meeting, the hope there is to call attention to Russian aggression in order to preempt Russia from playing victim in order to justify a military attack.
The U.S. making it clear there is still space for diplomacy.
Conflict is not inevitable.
Even as Russia has amassed over 100,000 troops on the borders of Ukraine, with equipment capable of an immediate invasion.
I think you'd have to go back quite a while into the Cold War days to see something of this magnitude.
Russian Defense Ministry video shows air defense units arriving by rail in Belarus, where thousands of Russian troops now also stand just 60 miles away from Ukraine's capital. According to the Pentagon, since December, the U.S. has sent over $200 million in security assistance to Ukraine, while reinforcing security for NATO allies. On Friday, President Biden said he'll put troops in the region. On Monday, President Biden will meet with the Emir of Qatar to discuss fallout from the U.S. departure from Afghanistan. They will also discuss how sanctions on Russia could affect Europe, which relies on Russian natural gas. Qatar's reserves could serve as a backup. Timing on Russia's decision when or if to advance may come down to sport. Putin is expected to attend Friday's opening ceremony at the Beijing Olympics. Deputy Secretary of State Wendy Sherman warned that a military action could follow.
Ukraine's president said last week that he does not want to see panic over the situation, but a White House official told Fox News over the weekend that the risk of invasion should not be downplayed. Dana?
Alex Hoff, thank you so much, reporting from the White House for us. Alex, thank you. Joining us live now from the Pentagon, Press Secretary Jon Kirby. Welcome back.
And I don't know if they chose to highlight the Ukraine story there because they had the press secretary for the Defense Department, Jon Kirby, as their guest. That's another bias that news organizations often have, is that they skew the news towards their exclusive guest. And Jon Kirby was, I don't have a clip of Jon Kirby, but they talked about how, you shouldn't underplay the threat, but the real problem is I think the threat has been kind of overplayed. I talked about that a lot last week, how and you saw they briefly reported that the president of Ukraine, Vladimir Zelensky, was saying not to panic. That was part of a lot of the reporting I've seen, that the people of Ukraine themselves don't see the recent escalation as a huge increase in threat, although they've been under threat for a long time. And I talked about last week how, Ukraine is already at war in that Crimea is occupied, and there's the whole thing going on in the Donbass region with the little green men and all that stuff. But anyway, I talked about that last week. I want to, I guess for Fox News, in terms of political bias, that wasn't too bad. The next news summary, I think, is actually the best one. It's the NBC News Meet the Press news summary, and it has a little bit of continuity from last week. Remember, last week my topic was building a better Biden, because there were multiple Sunday news programs who said it's time for, at the end of the first year of Biden's presidency, it's time for a reset. He needs to, he's at a low point in his poll numbers and needs something. Well, it turns out the Supreme Court nomination might be that something, and that's kind of the introduction that Chuck Todd gives to his biggest, longest pre-recorded video package, that starting off with, this could be the reset Biden needs, and then reporting in a good journalistic way on a lot of the problems the Biden administration has been having, then going into the issues about the Supreme Court nomination. And watch for this Roger Wicker clip. Senator Roger Wicker claiming that this is going to be an affirmative action pick because Biden has decided it's time, for the first time in U.S. history, to have a black woman. There are only like 7, I believe there are only 7 Supreme Court justices in U.S. history who aren't white men, and I didn't see Roger Wicker complaining about any of the white men, but watch for the Roger Wicker clip, because that's going to come up again later in some of the newsmaker clips. Senator Roger Wicker. Well, I'll talk about it with you a little more after we watch the entire news summary from NBC News Meet the Press yesterday together over here.
And a good Sunday morning. Just last week, we said President Biden was in desperate need of a reset. His poll numbers are falling, in particular among African Americans, and there's real fear that Democrats' midterm hopes will be sunk by a lack of enthusiasm among the very voters who put Mr. Biden in office. And then just like that, Mr. Biden was thrown a lifeline with the news that Supreme Court Justice Stephen Breyer would indeed retire at the end of this term. President Biden vowed to keep his promise during the campaign that he would appoint an African-American woman to the first court opening he had. That could help with declining black support. Supreme Court hearings could also blunt that enthusiasm problem, serving as a reminder to Democrats that elections have consequences and they matter. And getting a Supreme Court nominee confirmed would give Mr. Biden a political win after the disappointments in the last few months over voting rights and Build Back Better. Of course, replacing Breyer with another liberal won't change the court's current conservative tilt. But Mr. Biden finally has an open field with a real chance to put some points on the board and at least temporarily change the narrative of his presidency.
It's long overdue.
President Biden previewing his Supreme Court pick on Thursday, hoping to regain political momentum after a difficult month.
Person I will nominate will be someone with extraordinary qualifications, character, experience, and integrity. And that person will be the first black woman ever nominated to the United States Supreme Court.
Mr. Biden's approval rating among African Americans has dropped nearly 20 points since April to just 64%.
Do you think President Biden has done enough for black women voters?
I really don't.
Now he has the chance to show he can keep his campaign promises.
I'm looking forward to making sure there's a black woman on the Supreme Court.
This is a promise that he made and a promise that will be kept.
Among the likely contenders, Ketanji Brown Jackson of the Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit. She's a former Breyer law clerk, 51, and has twice been confirmed by the Senate, including once by this Senate.
I'm not injecting my personal views. I'm even-handedly applying the law.
Leandra Kruger, a justice on California's state Supreme Court. She clerked for Justice John Paul Stevens. She's 45 and was a deputy in the Solicitor General's office during the Obama administration, arguing a dozen cases before the Supreme Court. And J. Michelle Childs, a federal judge in South Carolina, recently nominated to the Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit. She's 55 and close with Jim Clyburn.
She's not an Ivy Leaguer. She got a bachelor's degree from University of South Florida. She got a Jewish doctorate from the University of South Carolina, her master's in law from Duke University. She's thoroughly Southern.
The Supreme Court vote, which now requires a simple majority in the Senate, will give Biden a victory after months featuring party divisions on Senate rules, voting rights, and the president's economic plan, Build Back Better. While some conservatives would like to take an aggressive approach,
this is a hard, woke left administration.
The irony is that the Supreme Court is at the very same time hearing cases about this sort of affirmative racial discrimination.
Yes.
And while adding someone who is the beneficiary of this sort of quote.
Without the votes to block a nomination, most Senate Republicans are signaling they will stay focused on high prices.
Rampant inflation.
Incredible inflation.
A 40-year high of inflation in the United States.
Meanwhile, the White House hopes this vote will fire up disappointed progressives.
When you don't change people's lives, people get upset.
And remind Democrats of the Supreme Court fights to come, including the likelihood that the court will limit or eliminate protections for abortion rights.
This is going to be a massive issue at the ballot boxes. There's just no question about it. There's going to be rage.
But with inflation a drag on at-risk Democrats, the question is how much even a Supreme Court appointment can break through.
Where's the war room on the cost of living?
And joining me now is the #2 Senate Democrat and chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee, Dick Durbin of Illinois.
And I will have a clip from Dick Durbin talking to Chuck Todd on Meet the Press, a clip that makes it sound like Ketanji Brown Jackson may be the leading contender for the nomination. And then I'll have two clips that make it look like maybe Michelle Childs is the leading contender. I'm here in California. I am not opposed to Leandra Kruger from the California Supreme Court. I don't remember that happening. I mean, the thing is, if you read your Constitution, to be on the Supreme Court, you don't even have to be a lawyer. That would be kind of cool if they appointed a non-lawyer sometime. I mean, I'm a lawyer, but I mean, could it be worse than some of the people they have on there now? And I'd like to see someone who was a public defender. You know, Joe Biden was a public defender for a brief part of his career, or the Sherilyn Ifill, who used to be head of the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. I think she'd be a great nominee. Some people have said that he should nominate Anita Hill. I mean, that would be like a total troll. But, well, first of all, because Joe Biden has a history of mistreating Anita Hill. You know, Anita Hill accused Clarence Thomas of sexual harassment, and that was a whole thing. I actually watched those hearings. But can you imagine Anita Hill and Clarence Thomas being on the Supreme Court together? That would be kind of... nobody ever brings up Anita Hill. How come no one ever brings up Anita Hill? But anyway, because she's too old. They want them all to be young. They're all... Anyway. But you saw that Roger Wicker clip that I told you to watch for. That's going to come up in some later Newsmaker clips where he's claiming that anyone who's nominated is tainted by affirmative action. That's what the point I was trying to make at the beginning, when you don't even have to be a lawyer to be on the Supreme Court. It's not like there are only a few qualified people for the seat. There are like so many people qualified. So many people could do the job. It's actually a fairly cushy job where, you know, they have these law clerks who will research anything for them, and it's not like there's so many black women who are qualified to be on the Supreme Court, and that I think is actually part of the political genius of saying at the beginning the nominee is going to be a black woman, because not only does that mean that you uplift the person who you nominate, but during this part of the process where they talk about potential nominees, we get to see how many qualified black women there really are to be Supreme Court justice or to be Supreme Court justices. So, I think hopefully that will be a positive outcome of this process. But anyway, that is what I have to say about the NBC News Meet the Press news summary there. The CBS News Face the Nation news summary kind of fell into that Fox News trap of covering, snow in winter as news, but at least they did it more briefly from New York, I think. And then they went to Mark Strassmann who I guess highlights the fact that CBS News could be called, as I've mentioned many times, the COVID broadcasting system, because they were the earliest and best of the big five corporate outlets in terms of covering the COVID pandemic back in the early, January, February, March 2020 days. Back when, I've said this many times that when they first started reporting on it, I didn't even take the clips, but I mentioned it during the show and said either they were overhyping the threat of this virus off in China, or they were the only station covering what was going to be the biggest story of the year, and turned out to be number 2. Anyway, so Mark Strassmann is covering the ongoing COVID pandemic after CBS falls into the snow in winter is news trap over here.
Good morning and welcome to Face the Nation. There's a lot to get to today, but we begin with that massive winter storm that walloped the Northeast, bringing with it at least 2 feet of snow, hurricane-force winds, and coastal flooding. Our Mola Lenghi reports from Boston. Mola?
Well, good morning, Margaret. It was a relentless and historic single-day snowstorm here in Boston. There was more snow here yesterday than the city averages the entire month of January. Throughout Massachusetts, plows faced whiteout conditions as the rate of the blinding snowfall made it a challenge for those cleanup crews to keep up. Now, the storm also whipped up waves Saturday, battering the entire New England coastline. Images from space show the bomb cyclone bearing down on the Northeast, dumping more than 2 feet of snow. Winds gusted as high as 83 miles per hour on Cape Cod in Massachusetts. A couple 100,000 homes and businesses lost power in the state, and tens of thousands are still without power today. A majority of flights, thousands of them, were canceled at major airports in the Mid-Atlantic and the Northeast. And this morning, the snow has finally lit up, but we're not yet in the clear, with much of the region now digging out and concerned about a deep freeze. The entire eastern seaboard was somehow, some way impacted by this storm system as far south as Florida, which felt freezing temperatures. Now, plows are working on the roads again this morning. They continue to do that, trying to clear them not only for the utility crews that have to restore power, but also getting them ready for the Monday morning work and school commutes. Margaret?
Mola Lenghi in Boston. Thank you. We turn now to the COVID-19 pandemic, where despite a decline in hospitalizations and new cases, deaths are still rising, and the virus is still highly transmissible. Community spread is in the high range across the country, and a new variant of Omicron has raised new concerns. Mark Strassmann reports.
Finally, a COVID update not steeped in dread.
We continue to move toward a time when COVID won't disrupt our daily lives, a time when COVID is no longer a crisis.
New COVID cases down sharply. Hospitalizations down encouragingly. But Omicron's overall milder impact comes with a qualifier.
Milder does not mean mild, and we cannot look past the strain on our health systems and substantial number of deaths.
A wintry sorrow. We're now averaging 2,300 COVID deaths a day, many preventable.
We have been trying to scream at the top of our lungs to say how bad it is.
Roughly 100 million eligible Americans have yet to get fully vaccinated.
We've done everything that we could. Ultimately, the decision does come back down to the individual, what choice they want to make.
After 2 months of runaway infections, Omicron's generally relaxing its headlock on American life. Only 9 states, Washington, D.C., and Puerto Rico still require indoor masking, regardless of vaccination status. San Francisco will ease its mask mandate starting Tuesday. And in Roanoke, Virginia,
it's time to stop refusing parents their right to parent.
The school board agreed. Masking's optional starting next month. But daycare centers remain worrisome, with kids too young for vaccines. The CDC's new guidance, providers should get boosted and tested at least once a week.
Something to keep an eye on, a new subvariant nicknamed Stealth Omicron. Detected in roughly half the states, preliminary findings show it's even more contagious. This truly is the virus that wouldn't leave. Margaret?
Mark Strassmann, thank you. We go now to former FDA Commissioner and Pfizer board member Dr. Scott Gottlieb, who...
And as usual, if you want to see the interview with Dr. Scott Gottlieb, at the link I put under sources in the video description, There's a link to CBS News Face the Nation, which goes to their YouTube channel, where they have the whole program split up into segments, including the full interview with Dr. Scott Gottlieb, and probably the best of the COVID coverage, because like I was saying before, I showed the news summary from CBS. Even though they fell into the snow in winter is news trap, they have had the best COVID coverage all the way from the beginning, and still even today probably, comparing CBS to the other programs, they did have the best COVID coverage on Sunday. Now I'm going to go over to ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos, where George Stephanopoulos does an introduction that this is a bias that I've talked about a lot on the cable news programs, or this actually ABC isn't cable news, it's network news, where they have a bias for reporting their new poll numbers as news when it's vaguely news, but it kind of segues into the same thing you saw from NBC, because they were talking about the need for a Biden reset last week, and so this week they talk about how the Supreme Court nomination could be the reset, after talking about bad poll numbers for Biden as news, which, like I said, is a little iffy. In the ABC News This Week with George Stephanopoulos news summary, starting with George Stephanopoulos and then going to one of the co-hosts of is he Chief White House Correspondent, Jon Karl? Is that? I think he's Chief White House Correspondent. I guess we'll find out when George Stephanopoulos introduces him in the clip I'll talk about with you a little more after we watch it together over here.
Good morning and welcome to This Week. We have a lot to cover this morning, and we begin with our brand new poll with Ipsos. It shows big challenges for President Biden heading into this year's midterm elections. 3 out of 4 Americans are pessimistic about the state of the economy. Only 29% support deploying troops to counter the Russian threat to Ukraine. And more than 3/4 of all Americans question the president's pledge to consider only black women to replace retiring Supreme Court Justice Stephen Breyer, saying he should consider all possible nominees. Chief Washington correspondent Jon Karl starts us off.
It was an untriggered flash of frustration triggered by a shouted question.
That's a great asset. More inflation. What a stupid son of a bitch.
Not President Biden's finest moment. He later apologized. But Biden has ample reason to be frustrated. He starts the second year of his presidency with his lowest approval rating yet. Voting rights legislation failed, as did the centerpiece of his domestic agenda, opposed by every single Republican and tanked by fellow Democrats. Frustration abroad, too. North Korean missile tests, Iran advancing its nuclear programs, and fears Russia may invade Ukraine. Biden is sending some U.S. troops to Eastern Europe, but he candidly acknowledged there's only so much he can do.
I don't think even his people know for certain what he's going to do.
So it was welcome news at the White House this week when word came that Justice Stephen Breyer would be retiring from the Supreme Court, giving Biden a chance to change the subject and to make history, keeping a campaign promise to nominate the first black woman to the Supreme Court.
It's long overdue in my view. I made that commitment during the campaign for president, and I will keep that commitment.
And while the retirement of a liberal justice won't give Biden the opportunity to change the court's conservative majority, maybe, just maybe, he can get at least some Republican support for whoever he nominates.
I'm going to invite senators from both parties to offer their ideas and points of view.
In a foreshadowing of what is likely to come, though, Republican leader Mitch McConnell declared, quote, "The president must not outsource this important decision to the radical left," prompting a sharp response from the White House.
If anyone is saying they plan to characterize whoever he nominates after thorough consideration with both parties as radical before they know literally anything about who she is, they just obliterated their own credibility.
With a 50-50 Senate, there's no room for error. Biden can reach out to Republicans, but he can't count on them. He'll need all 50 Democrats healthy, voting, and on board. And announcing his plan to retire, Justice Breyer invoked Lincoln's words at Gettysburg and offered his own plea for an American democracy that seems more fragile than it has for a long time.
We are now engaged in a great civil war to determine whether that nation or any nation so conceived and so dedicated can long endure. And I found some letters that George Washington wrote where he said the same thing. It's an experiment. And I'll tell you something. You know who will see whether that experiment works? It's you, my friend.
And we are joined now by the chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee, Senator Dick Durbin. Senator Durbin, thank you for...
And I will have a clip of Senator Dick Durbin, although from NBC News' Meet the Press, not from ABC. And I guess I got Jon Karl's title there wrong. He's not Chief White House Correspondent. He's Chief Washington Correspondent. So how could I have been so wrong? One other thing, I criticized that news summary for saying ABC was making their poll news. But one question they asked that, I think it is just like ripe for misinterpretation, and I don't even have to speculate on that because it's already, I've seen it today on Fox News, how they've run away with this question. The one where like about 75% of Americans, when asked if Biden should appoint a black woman, say he should consider all possible nominees, which of course on Fox News they're saying today that means Americans don't want him, that are angry at Biden for only looking at black women, which I don't think that's really what that... of course people are going to say, yes, look at all possible nominees, but it's a stupid answer anyway, because there's no way he can look at all possible nominees, because, like I said, you don't even have to be a lawyer to be nominated to the Supreme Court under the Constitution. There are like so many people who are, if you're going to even just say lawyers, there's so many people who are qualified. If you were going to consider all possible nominees, what about me? What about me? I went to college with Brett Kavanaugh. I'm as qualified as Brett. Well, I don't know. Anyway, so does that mean the American people think Joe Biden should consider me? No. If he only considers black women, there are so many exceptional qualified nominees. I talked about 3 of them earlier, and there are, so many more that it's ridiculous. You could do all sorts of little, demographic or gender, race, religion, whatever. You could like find so many qualified nominees, like even if you're looking for, liberal, Hindu, transgender, skateboarders. Well, I don't know about skateboarders. How many? Well, I guess that would probably guarantee that they're not too old to be on the Supreme Court. But anyway, I think I've talked too much about that poll question. And then the one other criticism I have of that news summary is, or the news coverage, is I saw a lot of people talking about Mitch McConnell's comment that you saw in that news summary, that he's saying that he's afraid Biden's going to outsource his Supreme Court pick to the left, outsource it to the the extreme left or whatever. Without, if you report that fact, you have to report the fact that Trump's 3 nominations were all outsourced to the Federalist Society for the express purpose of making sure that all of them would overturn Roe v. Wade. That you can't report that one fact with about what Mitch McConnell said about outsourcing the pick to the left without pointing out that Mitch McConnell was happy to have Trump outsource all of his nominations to this extreme conservative organization, I guess, the Federalist Society. But anyway, I just wanted to point that out before I get to... I still have one more news summary, right? Yeah, the CNN State of the Union news summary, Dana Bash, where you'll see she talks about the Supreme Court nomination and the Russian threat to Ukraine as the 2 top stories, because in both cases we're on the brink. Oh, spoiler, I gave away what is the State of the Union this week. That's something that Jake Tapper started when he took over State of the Union. Every week he starts the show, what is the State of the Union this week? And Dana Bash, I gave it away, sorry. We're on the brink, both for Supreme Court nomination of a black woman, which is true, and war in Ukraine, which possibly overhyped, as I will talk about with you a little more after we watch that clip together over here.
Hello, I'm Dana Bash in Washington, where the state of our union is on the brink of history as President Biden prepares to nominate a black woman to the Supreme Court, and on the brink of war in Europe as the Biden administration tries to manage the growing crisis between Ukraine and Russia. President Biden said Friday that he will move troops to NATO allied countries in Eastern Europe in the, quote, near term, as his top military general warned an invasion by the Russians would be, quote, horrific. Harsh assessments the Ukrainians are downplaying as that country's president urges calm. But in the latest sign of the growing threat, CNN is reporting that the U.S. sees indications Russia is positioning new supplies of blood near Ukraine's borders. That, according to two senior defense officials, it's a grim potential signal of Russian plans for an invasion. And on Capitol Hill, Republican and Democratic lawmakers are working together, trying to reach a compromise on a large sanctions bill to deter Putin or punish him, a bill that would require bipartisan support. I want to begin with a special exclusive this morning. Two top senators on the Foreign Relations Committee together, Democratic Chairman Bob Menendez of New Jersey and the Republican ranking member Jim Risch of Idaho. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me.
And I kept the news summary playing till that last part because this is something that's been happening. I think that's the third or fourth time now in the last couple months where one of the news programs has said, look, we've got a Democrat and a Republican appearing together. It's something new, something special. And I pointed out, as someone who's been watching these Sunday morning news analysis shows since the 1980s, I hate to say, but that's one of my qualifications for doing this weekly live stream, is I've been watching these shows like every single week. I think the number of weeks I've missed since the 1980s is maybe on one hand. So maybe on two hands. I don't know. Definitely no more than 10 since the 1980s, and probably less than 5. But anyway, so I've been watching these Sunday programs every Sunday for a long time. And it used to be, back when I started watching, when it was like This Week with David Brinkley, they would always have a Democrat and a Republican on together, and they'd ask them questions and they'd argue with each other. And then there has been a long fallow period where that hasn't really been going on for, I don't know, like maybe since the late 90s, since like Newt Gingrich, or I don't know when it started happening, or Obama years. That I'd have to do some study to figure out exactly when it stopped happening, but I don't know why it's so special. But anyway, you can let me know what you think about if they overhyped the Ukraine threat, and then they did talk about the Supreme Court justice opening for Biden's nomination as their top two stories. Didn't fall into the snow trap, I guess. But anyway, now I'm going to move on from those news summaries, which you can tell me which you think is the best. I juxtapose all five. That's the beginning of all five of the news programs. You can tell me what you think, which one was the best representation of what was most important last week. And now I'm going to show you several clips on my topic of the black woman on the Supreme Court. Starting off with the two clips I promised that make it look like the front runner is District Court Judge J. Michelle Childs from South Carolina, and the first positive sign for her is it sounds like Lindsey Graham, Republican Senator Lindsey Graham, is going to support her. Says all the right things, and you'll see in this interview with Margaret Brennan on CBS News' Face the Nation, she brings up that Roger Wicker clip that I talked about that I told you to keep in mind, because there are multiple clips where it comes up here, and Lindsey Graham rejects it. He says all the right things. The one thing that I would quibble with that he says here, well, there are a couple things, but one is about the way he characterizes the Kavanaugh hearings, but actually it's very, I guess not totally surprising, because Lindsey Graham has had a long history of going with the philosophy that the president is entitled to his picks for the Supreme Court, and unless someone's unqualified, he won't vote against them for ideological reasons. I believe Lindsey Graham actually voted for Sonia Sotomayor in the Obama administration, and it looks like he's going to vote for the nomination of Joe Biden's nominee, especially if it's J. Michelle Childs, as I'll talk about with you a little more after we watch that clip together over here.
President Biden has promised to name a black woman to replace Supreme Court Justice Stephen Breyer. Contenders include Ketanji Brown Jackson of Washington, D.C., Leandra Kruger of California, and Michelle Childs of South Carolina. The only potential nominee that the White House has publicly acknowledged being under consideration is Childs. South Carolina Republican Senator Lindsey Graham joins us from Clemson, South Carolina this morning. Good morning to you, Senator.
Good morning.
As you know, coming up on this program, Congressman Jim Clyburn, he has said repeatedly in interviews that South Carolina Federal District Judge Michelle Childs, not only as someone he likes, but that both South Carolina Republican senators will support her. So he's talking about you. Did you tell him you're a yes vote on Childs?
Here's what I will tell him and the nation. I can't think of a better person for President Biden to consider for the Supreme Court than Michelle Childs. She has wide support in our state. She's considered to be a fair-minded, highly gifted jurist. She's one of the most decent people I've ever met. It would be good for the court to have somebody who's not at Harvard or Yale. She's a graduate of the University of South Carolina, a public education background. She's been a workers' comp judge. She's highly qualified. She's of good character, and we'll see how she does if she's nominated. But I cannot say anything bad about Michelle Childs. She is an awesome person.
That sounds like pretty close to yes. You're a yes vote?
Well, I don't know if she's going to be nominated. If she's nominated, she will not be treated like Judge Kavanaugh, I promise you, by Republicans. Let's see how she does at the hearing. But I think I made it pretty clear that I'm a big admirer of
you did.
Judge Childs. And I'd like to see the court have a little more balance, some common sense on it. Everybody doesn't have to be from Harvard and Yale. It's okay to go to a public university and get your law degree.
Well, you have been glowing in your descriptions, but your colleague, Senator Roger Wicker of Mississippi, said picking a female black Supreme Court justice is affirmative racial discrimination. He questioned any potential impartiality from any of the candidates named. Nikki Haley of South Carolina also tweeted the president should not have a race or gender litmus test. President Reagan promised to nominate a woman, Sandra Day O'Connor. So why is this different?
Well, it's not different to me. Put me in the camp of making sure the court and other institutions look like America. You know, we make a real effort as Republicans to recruit women and people of color to make the party look more like America. Affirmative action is picking somebody not as well qualified for past wrongs. Michelle Childs is incredibly qualified. There's no affirmative action component if you pick her. She is highly qualified. And President Reagan said, running for office, that he wanted to put the first female on the court. Whether you like it or not, Joe Biden said, I'm going to pick an African-American woman to serve on the Supreme Court. I believe there are plenty of qualified African-American women, conservative and liberal, that could go onto the court. So I don't see Michelle Childs as an act of affirmative action. I do see putting a black woman on the court, making the court more like America. In the history of our country, we've only had 5 women serve and 2 African-American men. So let's make the court more like America, but qualifications have to be the biggest consideration. And as to Michelle Childs, I think she's qualified by every measure.
All right, Senator, I want to move on to Ukraine.
So then they move on to Ukraine. Like I said, if you want to watch the rest of the CBS News Face the Nation interview of Senator Lindsey Graham, down at the link under sources for CBS News Face the Nation, they have the program split up into segments on their YouTube channel, including the interview with Lindsey Graham. If you're interested in more Lindsey Graham, you heard like the Kavanaugh reference there, but Pretty much he said all the right things in terms of it not being affirmative action, except that his description of affirmative action, when somebody less qualified gets picked because of their race or whatever, that is not what affirmative action is. Affirmative action assumes that there are many, many qualified people for a single spot, and so taking race into consideration to make up for past discrimination that is legally permissible, that doesn't make the person who gets that spot less qualified. It just means that there are many, many qualified people, just like there are many, many qualified people to be a Supreme Court justice, as I was saying before, and the fact that all but 7 in history have been white men means that there has been a history of discrimination. So actually, it is affirmative action to consider race and gender to make up for past wrongs. Lindsey Graham is wrong on that point. I don't know why he has to make affirmative action something that's wrong. I guess it's something the Supreme Court's gonna just said they're going to take up this term, which you saw in the whole Roger Wicker senator from Mississippi clip. But I was at least gratified to see that Lindsey Graham had like the best retort to Mississippi Senator Roger Wicker's affirmative action comment, except for the fact that he misrepresented and demonized affirmative action when it shouldn't be. So anyway, that was clip 1. Senator Lindsey Graham talking about how, I mean, it looks like he's going to support Michelle Childs as a nominee, and you even heard the introductory question that Margaret Brennan asked, mentioning both of the senators. So that's Tim Scott, he's the other senator from South Carolina, so apparently both those votes, which makes it a bipartisan, with the 50 Democrats. They only need 50 Democrats and the vice president, but it would be nice. Though I heard some discussion about whether the vice president can break the tie in the case of Supreme Court justices, because that would be the executive branch nominating and confirming, or I heard that on Fox News as a theory of what might be a problem. But I think that they'll probably have more than 50 votes for any of the 3 nominees that we've been talking about as front runners, but especially Michelle Childs. And you heard Lindsey Graham's answer, making it sound very, very likely that he would be one of those Republicans voting for her to put her on the Supreme Court. And the person who said that there would be 2 South Carolina senators voting for her is Representative Jim Clyburn from South Carolina, and I've talked about him before. He's come up a lot of times because he kind of saved Joe Biden's political career, his presidential aspirations, by endorsing him before the South Carolina primary and putting his, contacts and machine or whatever, his political assets behind Biden's nomination when he'd lost the first couple, the Iowa and New Hampshire, and then he won it back in South Carolina right before the pandemic started, or right as the pandemic was starting. And one of the things I talked about is the only public thing that Jim Clyburn asked for from Biden is to have his protege, Cedric Richmond, be one of the senior advisors in the Biden administration. And so Cedric Richmond is a senior advisor to Biden. But you'll see in this very brief clip from Face the Nation, Jim Clyburn mentioning that 13 months ago, which means before Biden was even president, back when there were negotiations for what he was owed for his help, he mentioned Michelle Childs, which is another piece of information that makes me think that Michelle Childs is going to be Biden's nominee for the Supreme Court. And I'll talk about that a little more after we watch this brief clip of Jim Clyburn talking to Margaret Brennan on Face the Nation yesterday over here.
You've been vocal in your endorsement of South Carolina Federal District Judge Michelle Childs. The White House acknowledged she's being looked at. Senator Graham just gave her a glowing recommendation. Have you spoken to President Biden about her?
Yes, I did several months ago. I have not spoken to him recently about her. Sent him sent the White House a letter 13 months ago.
Okay.
And he and I have been talking about her for several months.
So that makes it sound like there is some sort of quid pro quo, or I don't know, that if you're going to think about political payback for Jim Clyburn, which is quite possible that this may be one of the things he asked for, and that would make Michelle Childs the most likely nominee for the Supreme Court opening. The one thing that is against her is, you'll see in this next clip, that Senator Dick Durbin, talking to Chuck Todd on NBC News' Meet the Press, mentions how it would be easy to do get a nominee through who had recently been affirmed or had been voted on by the Senate Judiciary Committee. And who does that point to? That would be Ketanji Brown Jackson, who was just recently put on the D.C. Circuit by this exact Senate Judiciary Committee, already voted, and I think she got 53 votes, so that means she's already been through the FBI check and been vetted and everything. This is a fact that I know, and apparently it's a fact that Chuck Todd knows, because I often criticize him for being well prepared, but not easy, but he doesn't have an easy time listening to what his guests are saying and coming up with good follow-up questions based on what they say. But Dick Durbin talks about what he wants, or how it would be easier for a nominee to get through the committee if they've already been voted on recently by the committee. And Chuck Todd hears that and later asks a follow-up question about Ketanji Brown Jackson, just as I was explaining. So kudos to Chuck Todd for doing what I say he doesn't often do, which is listening and then cross-examining based on what the person said over in this clip.
You'll be overseeing this confirmation process for whoever the president ends up selecting. And before we get into some specific names, I want to get into a couple of numbers here. Amy Coney Barrett, 27 days from nomination to confirmation. Sonia Sotomayor, 66 days from nomination to confirmation. I know you decried the speed of what happened with Amy Coney Barrett, and there's a lot of things that you want to decry on that. What should we expect timeline-wise? Closer to Sonia Sotomayor or closer to Amy Coney Barrett?
Well, a great deal depends on the nominee. If the person has been before the committee seeking approval for a circuit court, then the committee knows quite a bit about that person, and that can be taken into consideration. If there are no new developments for someone who's been before the committee in the previous year or two, it makes a real difference. I can just say this: it's going to be fair, it's going to be deliberate, and we're going to be timely about it too. This is a lifetime appointment to the highest court in the land. We should take it seriously.
Look, I am obviously going to try to pin you down one more time on timing. Easter recess, mid-April. Is that a fair target at this point to get it done before you guys take off? Before, or do you think probably just after?
By the Amy Coney Barrett test, yes, it is. And so we'll see. We'll see what develops. And a great deal, maybe all of it, depends on the nominee and the background of the nominee.
You said something just interesting to me just now. You said it depends if they've been before a committee before. Ketanji Brown Jackson, obviously on the circuit, on the D.C. circuit, she has been before this committee. This Senate has received 53 votes. Based on what you know about her, do you think she should be the front runner for this post?
I sure don't want to speculate on that. The White House made it clear when they told me about the Breyer vacancy that they had not decided, the president had not made the decision, and I want to respect that. I think suggesting there's a front runner or this person is now moving ahead, it's unfair to all the nominees. This is in the hands of the president, as it should be.
What kind of conversations have you had with the ranking member, Lindsey Graham, about what kind of process this is going to be? Or are relations just sort of, that's just not how it works anymore?
Well, I would say that the ranking member is now the senator from Iowa.
Oh, sorry, my apologies there. That's right.
I called him the next day. We had a brief conversation about it, and I have a good working relationship with Senator Grassley. We really trust one another. I like him, and I hope he likes me as much, and I think we're going to do our best to serve our country in this capacity. He's been through it. I've been through it for 7 of the current Supreme Court justices. I suggest he might even be in for a longer term and has really faced them all. So we do have experience on the subject.
You know, it's interesting here. Clarence Thomas is about to become the only member of the current Supreme Court who was nominated by a president of one party and confirmed by a Senate controlled by the other party. You think we'll see that again in our lifetime?
Well, and think back about Stephen Breyer. Here's a man who worked as the chief assistant to Ted Kennedy, and when his vote came up in the Senate, he was approved 87-9. It's an indication of the good old days when there was much more bipartisanship. But my goal is to make sure that we have a deliberate, timely hearing, but also to reach out to the Republican side and see if they can join us in making it a bipartisan nomination. I think that speaks well of the court, and it speaks well of the Senate if we can achieve it.
Ooh, did you see that? Right after Chuck Todd got those kudos for listening and responding and talking about how Ketanji Brown Jackson is a appellate court judge who just got confirmed by the Senate Judiciary Committee, and that's what Dick Durbin said he was looking for, and so he actually followed up and asked a question about that. And then right after that, he makes like the dumb mistake of saying Lindsey Graham is the ranking member on the Senate Judiciary Committee, when it's of course Chuck Grassley. And Chuck Todd can't even remember Chuck Grassley is the ranking member, and they're both named Chuck, so that makes it even like doubly ignominious, at least in my opinion. So I don't know, Chuck Todd kind of dug himself a hole at the end after, because that's like the being prepared. That was sort of like a prepared question. I always talk about how Chuck Todd is well prepared, but doesn't like pivot well when after he's listening to the answer, and he like did the opposite there. So what's up with Chuck Todd this week? You can let me know what you think down in the comment section. But speaking of being disappointed, there's a senator who never disappoints, or never fails to disappoint, I should say. Senator Susan Collins, who voted for Kavanaugh, who voted for Neil Gorsuch, didn't vote for Amy Coney Barrett, which comes up in this answer, but accuses Biden of politicizing the nomination process by saying in the campaign he would nominate a black woman, even though Reagan did the exact same thing, which he says he didn't, even though he did. So, and she not only does she say Reagan didn't, she says, well, and she's like laughing and saying, I checked, and Reagan as a candidate said that one of the nominations he was going to make to the Supreme Court would be a woman. But Susan Collins apparently thinks that wasn't politicizing the process, despite Biden doing pretty much the same thing. And anyway, I'll talk about that a little more after we watch Susan Collins together over here.
Now, Senator Collins, thank you for joining us this morning. You just heard Senator Durbin talk about his timeline for the Supreme Court pit talk, that he's consulted with you. Are you open to supporting who the president picks?
George, I would welcome the appointment of a black female to the court. I believe that diversity benefits the Supreme Court, but the way that the president has handled this nomination has been clumsy at best. It adds to the further perception that the court is a political institution like Congress when it is not supposed to be. So I certainly am open to whomever he decides to nominate. My job as a senator is to evaluate the qualifications of that person under the advice and consent role.
You say that it's clumsy, but isn't it, as Senator Durbin pointed out, isn't it exactly what President Reagan did when he said he would appoint a woman to the Supreme Court? Isn't it exactly what President Trump did when he said he would appoint a woman to replace Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg?
Actually, it isn't exactly the same. I've looked at what was done in both cases, and what President Biden did was, as a candidate, make this pledge, and that helped politicize the entire nomination process. What President Reagan said is, as one of his Supreme Court justices, he would like to appoint a woman, and he appointed a highly qualified one in Sandra Day O'Connor.
Isn't this process politicized no matter what you do? I mean, look at what happened after the death of Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Justice Barrett pushed through in record time. One of the reasons I suppose you voted against her.
Actually, the reason I voted against Amy Coney Barrett was that her nomination and the vacancy occurred too close to the election, the presidential election. And Republicans, just in the Obama administration, had established a precedent that we were not going to confirm someone. It was Merrick Garland in that case in an election year. I did not agree with that decision, but once that precedent was established, and given how close the death of the Supreme Court justice was to when the appointment was made of Justice Barrett, I felt that it should have been up to the next president to make the decision.
You voted for Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson for elevation to the D.C. Court of Appeals. If she's the president's nominee, can you support her for the Supreme Court?
I'll certainly give her every consideration. I have no idea, since she was confirmed, what rulings she's been involved in, what writing she has done. And I have not met her personally, and that's why I really appreciated Chairman Durbin reaching out to me and offering to make the nominee available for an extensive interview and to provide me with whatever information I need to make a decision on whomever the nominee is.
You share Senator Durbin's confidence?
So, yeah, that was totally wrong from Senator Susan Collins. I don't know why George Stephanopoulos didn't call her on it right there. Later in the program, they showed, of ABC's This Week, they showed the Reagan clip of him as a candidate saying that he was going to nominate a woman as one of his nominees to the Supreme Court. But anyway, it sounds, however, like Susan Collins could likely be a yes vote on Biden's nominee. To see how to answer some of those questions about affirmative action without making the mistakes that Susan Collins made, check out what Chris Sununu said over on CNN State of the Union to Dana Bash over here.
Let's move on to the Supreme Court. President Biden pledged to nominate a black woman to succeed Justice Stephen Breyer. On Friday, Republican Senator Roger Wicker said whoever Biden picks will be a, quote, beneficiary of affirmative racial discrimination and filling a, quote, quota. Do you agree with that?
Well, look, I'm never for quotas. I think you just, in the opportunity of bringing somebody to the U.S. Supreme Court, it's an amazing opportunity, and it always has to be on merit.
But is this a quota?
Oh, I'll just say as a governor, I don't see things as quotas like that. No, I mean, there's a very limited number of individuals. You want folks with a diverse set of backgrounds, of course. So in that sense, no, I wouldn't agree it's a quota. You want somebody that brings a different perspective. And whether it's a person of color, whether it's a woman or a male, whatever it might be, you want a variety of perspectives.
You're okay with him saying, I'm going to nominate a black woman?
If that's what he feels like the Supreme Court needs, and that's what gets confirmed by the Senate, then that's the process. I think the most important thing, what every American wants, is a civil, respectful process on both sides as we move forward. That would be a nice breath of fresh air for America, and I think that's what everyone hopes for.
I want you to listen to what the former president, Donald Trump, said at a rally.
Oh, and I'm not even going to talk about what Donald Trump said at his rally over the weekend about pardoning January 6th insurrectionists, although that's what that next question is about. But you see that brief reference there by Governor Chris Sununu to breath of fresh air for a respectful civil process. It's kind of like what Lindsey Graham said about Kavanaugh. Well, those were sort of like brief references. You can't miss the Kavanaugh reference over on Fox News Sunday's questioning of Senator Tom Cotton, a very conservative senator, where they, I think, totally misrepresent. They never even mention. At one point, you'll see in Dana Perino's questioning, she says Kavanaugh had to come back and defend himself, but they never say what he had to defend himself from. And I'll go on a brief Kavanaugh rant, although I have to finish up the show really quickly. But here's the final Newsmaker clip before the Dash and Sandy or Dandy clip for the Dash and Sandy fans. Oh, and thank you, Matthew, for that Super Chat contribution. I really appreciate it. Makes me feel like I should keep going and keep doing these things. But anyway, here's Dana Perino mischaracterizing the Kavanaugh hearings and Tom Cotton's response in this clip.
The arrest warrant. Anyway, there's one of those. I also wanted to ask you about this. The president's going to have an opportunity to replace a Supreme Court justice. No doubt, many on the Republican side of the Judiciary Committee remember what it was like for Brett Kavanaugh. Let's take a look back at this exchange.
Can you think of any laws that give government the power to make decisions about the male body?
I'm happy to answer a more specific question, but
male versus female.
There are medical procedures
that the government has the power to make a decision about a man's body.
I thought you were asking about medical procedures.
No.
And it went on and on from there. And we also remember all the things that happened. In fact, a second hearing for him to defend himself. How do you think the Republicans will approach the vetting of the nominee that President Biden will choose?
Well, first off, Dana, as a member of the committee, I will try to ask questions that contain a bit more logic than Kamala Harris's line of questioning right there. But I suspect we'll all keep an open mind. We will review the nominee on her merits. I can't say that I've got wild expectations that Joe Biden is going to nominate someone who I think I can support or many Republicans can support, because I've seen dozens of his nominees to the lower courts, and they've almost to a person been left-wing ideologues who think judges should make the law rather than apply and uphold the Constitution and the laws as they are passed. I can say one thing that I won't do, and I doubt any Republican will do, is engage in the kind of grotesque smear campaigns against the character of fine men like Clarence Thomas, or as we saw what happened with Brett Kavanaugh 2 years ago. We'll give a thorough vetting into any nominees' legal philosophies as well as their career and their character and their temperament. But we're not going to do what Democrats do, which is simply make up smears against a nominee. And I hope that never happens again.
Yeah, not looking back into yearbooks, so to speak. Thank you, Senator Cotton. Have a great time today watching any football game that you want to see, and hope that your team wins. Whoever.
That was great cross-examination by Dana Perino. No, of course not, because Kavanaugh was credibly accused of a sexual assault in his freshman year at Yale. When I lived in the same dorm that he lived in, the FBI did not do a thorough investigation. The White House stopped the FBI from interviewing a lot of witnesses. He also lied about his drinking behavior at Yale. That was pretty clear as someone who lived, lived in the same Lawrence Hall with Kavanaugh back in the 1983-84 school year. I didn't graduate with him because I took a couple years off between my sophomore and junior year, but I started my freshman year with Brett Kavanaugh, and he was not smeared. He was They rushed him through before the FBI could investigate a lot of witnesses. His freshman roommate in 7 FBI background checks never interviewed his freshman roommate. What does FBI stand for? Forget about it. I did this whole tweet thing way back then. So anyway, I don't want to go into all that again, but I'm just telling you, Brett Kavanaugh was not smeared. He was protected by Trump and the Republicans from the thorough investigation that would show that he lied his way onto the Supreme Court. But anyway, that's the last clip that I'm going to show you. I do need to finish up the program. I want to remind you all, like I said, I'm doing this Thursday live stream right under the video. The first link under the video goes to this live stream, and if you click on that little bell, set a reminder, then you'll get a reminder, and you can watch my live stream, ACLU, Free Speech and Critical Race Theory, Thursday, 4 p.m. Pacific time. And I'm late. I have a 5 o'clock meeting, as I've talked about before, but I do have a Dash and Sandy clip. This is almost like a West Wing hallway walking clip, both Dash and Sandy, to finish up the show over here. And there you go, Dash and Sandy, or Dandy for the Dash and Sandy or Dandy fans. Thanks, Tom Trask, for that last-minute Super Chat contribution. I appreciate that. And I got to finish up the show, but I will be back next Monday and on Thursday, as I said. So give yourself a notification if you want to watch that special live stream on Thursday at 4 p.m. Pacific. Until then, I guess I will be seeing all of you around the internet.